Browns made a huge roster move, as we know, at quarterback, activating Deshaun Watson's window for opportunity to return to the team. Some thoughts on that really quickly, things going on around Berea with the injury report, and then we have our Behind Enemy Line segment with Justin Melo today, which is a fantastic guest covering the Tennessee Titans. Let's get started with today's Browns film breakdown podcast brought to you by FanDuel and on Freedy Dental. What's up, guys? Welcome into today's show. We have, like I said, an open here that is probably something most of us don't really want to talk about at this point, which is the idea that the Browns are entertaining a setup where Deshaun Watson, who was activated within the practice window for return, has an opportunity to come back. He is, well, as you know about this setup, it's 21 days for him to be activated to the roster off of PUP. So he will have that opportunity to work through practice and see if he's good to go. I don't know if the Browns will activate him and play him, actually put him on the field. My hunch still remains no on that based on everything that's been said. So, I don't really want to waste too much time with this other than to note that he is practicing. He's out there. He's in full pads. You could see some video of him yesterday. But like I said, this is a situation with the Browns. They're starting Shador Sanders. That's where the focus is this weekend. It remains there until we have some other piece of evidence. At this point, I don't think it's fruitful to travel down the what could be looming road until the offseason, where decisions have to be made, both immediate and into the future. And like I said, I don't think it's fruitful to just sit here and predict what's going to happen with him. I don't think there's a world he plays for the Browns again, but there's also a fair argument to be made on the other side of that. And I think that my point is that there will be time to do it, and we'll get to it. But for now, until he's activated, not really any need to go too deep on the topic. All right. Like I said, 21 days, though, if he doesn't get activated in those 21 days, then he will not be a part of the active roster this year. But that kind of coincides with the end of the season coming before too long, too. So there you go. Otherwise, at practice yesterday, here's who's not participating. Brendan Bates with an ankle injury. Devin Bush did not practice with a foot injury. Jack Conklin with a concussion. Aiden Huntington with a quad. Isaiah McGuire with a knee. Dylan Sampson is dealing with a calf injury, and then Wyatt Teller also dealing with a calf injury. So those are the people not out on the field for practice. And you do get a little concerned, as we noted, they signed Sam Kamara to the active roster, but Huntington with a quad, McGuire with a knee, and then you are, still dealing with Alex Wright coming back from his injury as well. So that's another one that kind of looms there. But he was back at practice for the first time. He's out there, but is he actually going to participate this weekend? We'll see, right? Shador Sanders spoke to the media. He talked about needing to tempo up. I think this is an interesting topic for him and some good self-realization. He said, sometimes I look for the big play, and I do that when I'm feeling like I'm pressing, when I feel like we need to get a spark. So that's something I review within myself. And I know in those situations, I can't do that at certain times. That is a huge part of his maturation process. If he can break himself of chasing things down the field when the situation doesn't call for it, then we'll start to see, I think, a better, more consistent version potentially for Shador Sanders. So it's good to hear him say that. It's clearly something that's being talked about internally. And he also put he and Jerry Jeudy spoke about like the situation on the sideline, emotional, but they both said we resolved that. We're not going to speak on that. Shador said, and Jerry Jeudy said we spoke about it. We're good. So none of that stuff matters in so much as moving forward, getting on the same page. Shador talking about speeding up the tempo. Those are all things that you want to hear and appropriately, put into action will be what the Browns need, right? To be a little cleaner there. So yeah, that kind of wraps up the DMPs. We'll keep our eye on that on Thursday. Otherwise, around the Browns, not much else really noteworthy. So, yeah, I think it's a good thing to see some clarity on where Watson is with the injury. We'll see what they do with that situation. Obviously, remains around the Browns quarterbacks in general over the next half year with the draft and everything. The most interesting part of where all of this goes and gets rectified. So, I I think like you guys, we're all paying attention to every single thing they do and choose. And Stefanski even updated the situation as well around Watson, kind of a very modest answer. He said, "My focus obviously is getting him back to playing football, practicing football, which he hasn't done in over a year. So it's a good next step for him." He wouldn't say the timetable, which is what you would expect. But obviously, the next step could be getting some scout team reps after he does individual periods for however long they want him to do just the individual throwing and all of that on the field. It's also very cold, and coming off that injury, that's another thing to keep in mind as well. So I just don't think there's a big hurry here. At minimum, it'd be a late activation at the end of that window, in my opinion. We'll see if they end up going down that route. Now, so we're going to shift over to our conversation with Justin Melo, who does a great job covering. He does some league-wide stuff for the Draft Network, so he's covered different various parts of the draft, player interviews, things of that nature, but does just a fantastic job covering the Titans. He does so in a couple different places, including Music City Miracles, which is a spot that he covers them. And he gets on YouTube and does some fantastic work on YouTube, with covering them from a couple perspectives, but largely the Music City Audible, they do a really good job there too. So, yeah, let's talk everything Titans, about where they're at, their pick situation, how their roster got to the point that it is now. There's a lot of good stuff here. So let's take some time after our quick break and dig in on the Titans with Justin Melo. Justin, I feel like between I've done this with the Raiders, a guest, and several others here late in the season, where the Jets as well, where I felt like talking to somebody who's covering a team where you're like, this is probably 2026 discussion, but with Browns and Titans, we're there. It's just a matter of which team wants to be out there this weekend in the cold weather. And I'm interested in your take on that. Before we start, I do want you to give us a quick synopsis of how they landed at this point. Everything around the season, like give it to us as best you can. I think you could probably do your own 40-minute show on this, but I thought you could give us, what's catch us up on the Titan season.
Well, some really bad decision making over the last couple of years. And some of that, it takes time to build and it takes time to catch up to you. And that's what's happened to the Titans, right? Like 3 first-round picks in a row. How does it sound when it's, Traylon Burks, Caleb Farley, Isaiah Wilson? You're getting, you've got none of those guys are on the team anymore. And in the Traylon Burks case, you traded A.J. Brown for him, and essentially, right? You fire a good head coach in Mike Vrabel. You fire GM and John Robinson, and then fire the successor a year and a half in Rand Carthon, right? Like revolving door of players and coaches. You fire Brian Callahan a year and a half into his tenure. Now, I think that was probably warranted. They were terrible under Brian Callahan, but the point is you hired the wrong guy and then you fired him really quickly, right? So just all that kind of catching up to them. Hindsight's 2020, but what they probably should have done was fired Brian Callahan in the offseason. They had this reputation of they pull the trigger too quickly, so they wanted to be patient. But if they had fired him after one season, which they should have, they would have given themselves a chance to align a coach with Cam Ward at number 1 overall. Now they're going to try to do that in his sophomore year. But to answer your question in short, just a lot of bad decisions finally catching up to them.
Yeah, that feels like a pretty similar sentiment where the Browns have had that same, stigma of hire fire too quick. They had the same thing happen. They kept Hugh Jackson around halfway through Baker Mayfield's start of his career. They, have obviously maybe perhaps done the same here with Kevin Stefanski. Maybe kept him a year too long. It's tough to tell. Some of these things that the Browns are dealing with is a similar sentiment. So what you're saying there is a similar feeling to what Browns fans feel with trusting ownership to make the right choice on these things is what is ultimately most challenging. You talked about Cam Ward So these are two franchises, obviously the first pick, second pick in the most recent draft, where, the Browns could have been one and they could have been going after this Cam situation, and the Titans could have flipped their pick and done what the Browns did. So it's really the Browns are now looking to figure out. It feels like now we're in the flip side of this, right? Which kind of makes these two teams interesting trade candidates, if you think about it, because the Titans feel like they have their quarterback. The Browns need to go get the quarterback, but they made the trade to kind of accumulate some things. But it feels like maybe if the Titans have the first pick, they're trying to accumulate some things. So let's do this first. Cam Ward, it's the metrics aren't fun, but that's going to happen in the turmoil of this first season. But I have seen, just outside looking in, enough encouraging throws to see how this guy becomes really good in the league. Am I wrong on that?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. Look, the Titans aren't writing the handbook on how to support a rookie quarterback, right? I mean, first of all, they fired, they took play calling away from the head coach after week 3, and they gave it to the quarterback coach, not to the offensive coordinator, to the quarterback coach. And then they fired that head coach after week 6 anyway. So Cam Ward is on his second play caller and second head coach of the rookie season. And if you combine those two things, he's had 3 different people in his ear, right? He's had 2 different head coaches and 2 different play callers. So, and then you look at the supporting cast, he's thrown to a bunch of rookies. Like they don't have, they lose Calvin Ridley to an injury. They don't have a real number 1 receiver. They can't run the ball. It's a nightmare surroundings, right? Like the surroundings are a nightmare for him. And I think all things considered, he has played quite well. There have been flashes of high-level quarterback play. Now, it's been a bit of a roller coaster. It hasn't been perfect. There have been some turnover-worthy plays, some ball security issues with fumbles, taking some sacks maybe that he didn't have to early on in the year. But the last 2 weeks really defines his season. 2 weeks ago against the Seahawks, he played his best game of the season. That was against a team that's like top 5 in pass defense EPA. And he went out there. They almost upset the Seahawks. They lost by 6 points. And it was strictly because of how Cam Ward played in that game. Well, they come back the following week against Jacksonville, and I would argue he played his worst game of the season. They lose 25-3, sloppy with his mechanics, inaccurate, missed, probably 5 to 8 throws that he should have completed, a little bit indecisive, took a sack or 2 that he shouldn't have. So, he's going through the roller coaster right now, but I think certainly there have been enough flashes that are incredibly encouraging. And in fact, when they hire another coach this offseason, call me crazy, I think the job's going to be pretty enticing. If you're inheriting the number 1 overall pick and you're in a position to trade it and get a king's ransom for it, and you like the quarterback, they're going to have the most cap space in the NFL as well. They're in a great city in Nashville, and they're getting a state-of-the-art new stadium in 2027. So I think Cam Ward makes the job incredibly enticing. And, certainly considering all the struggles and the surroundings around him, he's played pretty good football.
Yeah, we'll talk at the end about what you think they need to draft. But for now, talk about these guys who are going to matter around Cam on offense on Sunday. What names are Browns fans going to see? I think the pass catching group's probably not a well-known group across the league, and then how they're playing up front.
Yeah, not well, in short. I mean, the supporting cast on offense is quite poor. They lost Calvin Ridley to a season-ending injury. That he wasn't playing all that great, but that was still catastrophic to them. They got a couple rookies who are catching the ball well. Shimere DK, who is doubling as a wide receiver and probably an all-pro returner on special teams. He's returned 2 punts for touchdowns this year. He's been the best return. Yeah.
That's bad for us. The Browns are one of the worst special teams in the league, man.
Well, he's dynamic with the ball in his hands. 2 return touchdowns. He had another one called back for a phantom penalty. Like the guy's been electric on special teams, and he's been pretty good at wide receiver as well. He's fast, makes people miss in the open field, dynamic threat. Gunnar Helm, the rookie tight end out of Texas, is playing well, been incredibly efficient. As of about a week ago, I believe he had caught 23 of 29 targets thrown his way. He's made some big-time plays up the sideline, really good hand-eye coordination. He's out-muscling guys at the catch point. Alec Iomanner, another 4th-round receiver, has been really cold lately, but he started the year really hot. Caught Cam's first career touchdown, was a highlight reel play by him in week 2 against the Rams. He's had a couple of other big plays on offense, but again, he missed a game recently due to injury. He's been kind of cold since coming back. The tight end, Chigakonkwo, is playing quite well, got a lot of chemistry with Cam Ward. Feels like he's been his go-to target over these last couple weeks, especially since Calvin Ridley went down with the injury. Are they playing well up front? I mean, not quite to expectations. They're not a full-blown disaster, but they've got a lot of resources poured into this offensive line. That means they came into the season with high expectations. An $82 million left tackle in Dan Moore, a first-round left guard in Peter Skoronski, a $50 million center in Lloyd Cushenberry, a first-round pick, top 10 at right tackle in J.C. Latham, and another big-time free agent addition at right guard in Kevin Zeitler, who you'll know pretty well.
Yeah.
Titans fans had hope that they would be like the 15th best offensive line in the NFL this year. I'd say they're probably more like the 21st or 22nd. Cam Ward's been sacked more than any quarterback in the league. That's got to do with a little bit of, the rookie occasionally holding on to the ball a bit too long, trying to extend plays, and also inconsistencies in pass protection. I imagine Myles Garrett is going to be really excited to see his old friend Dan Moore, who he routinely abused when he was with the Steelers, playing left tackle for the Titans. So, no, the pass-catching core, it's not an NFL-level pass-catching core right now, and the offensive line is, performing in like the bottom third of the league.
Would you say offensively they're living in the gun, trying to get things accomplished from there, a zone team? How would you just kind of categorize their offense, what they're trying? I know this is probably, like you said, multiple play callers in. It's probably hard to totally pin down, but I was just curious how you would label what they try to do offensively.
Yeah, it's been frustrating because it's hard to figure out what their identity is. They can't run the ball well at all. They've got an interim head coach in Mike McCoy who's a total coward. It's like he's kicking field goals on 4th and 1 from the 10, like things of that nature. He's punting when they're down multiple scores. He punted 4th and 1 last week in the third quarter when they're down 18-3 from like the 40-yard line. He punts like Brian Callahan, this is still his offense. He wanted to be an 11 personnel team because that's what they ran in Cincinnati when he was the coordinator with Zach Taylor as the head coach. But they're really bad in 11 personnel. The Titans are. They have not been able to figure out. They've been most effective out of 12, and they've got 2 good tight ends in Chig and Gunnar Helm, but they're not committing to 12 probably as often as they should. They run some zone. They run a lot of duo and power. That was kind of the Bill Callahan, who, by the way, you'll know well, he quit when they fired his son in the middle of the season. So it's been a train wreck. There's not a lot of identity. They're living a lot out of shotgun. The thing they're trying to drill into Cam Ward's head, take what the defense gives you, try not to be an agent of chaos at quarterback. He can go big play hunting. That's what he was at Miami. The issue is early on in the year, he wasn't doing it enough, kind of taking the underneath. Well, this past weekend against Jacksonville, he did it too much. He had a career low in yards per attempt, 3.7 yards per passing attempt. He had been nowhere near that mark this year. It felt like the pendulum swung too much the other way, where he was only taking what was underneath and they weren't trying to chase the explosives at all. The offense is a mess right now. Again, as you said, multiple play callers, multiple head coaches. It feels like they don't know what they are, and that's what they need the next head coach to do above anything, is establish some culture, get some leadership back in that locker room. They lost a lot of it when Mike Vrabel left, and maybe above all, have an identity. What do you want to be?
Defensively, it feels like when you see, and again, you are the expert here, but I every time I see something Tennessee draft, it's they need pass rush. They need pass rush. That's the focal point. Is that the case? Like, talk to me if you can about where, if the Titans are turning this thing around next year, is the defense sufficient in some areas? Like, how's that group looking?
Well, they need a premier edge rusher. That is very much the accurate take. They don't have one at all. They traded their best one in the middle of the year, who was Draymond Jones, who was on a 1-year deal. They got a draft pick for an expiring contract. That was the goal. Denard Wilson, the defensive coordinator, I'll say this. I think the defense is playing above its talent level right now because on paper, it looks pretty bad. And over the last month or so, Paul Kuharsky had a great tweet the other day, Titans beat writer. They've been top 10 in multiple categories defensively. Jeffrey Simmons is obviously the name that everyone knows. He's actually playing at an all-pro level at defensive tackle. There's no quit in him. I would argue he's playing the best football of his career and he's had a good career. He's just been downright dominant, and there's no quitting him. Like, they're getting blown out by Jacksonville last weekend, and you can just see the guy splitting double teams, playing as hard as he's played all year. You know, at edge, there's just not a lot of talent. They've got a veteran guy in Jihad Ward who's actually playing decently for them. Arden Key, veteran pass rusher who's been around, has been playing his best ball over the last 3 weeks. They've got Tavondre Sweat up the middle, a big run-stopping nose tackle. They've got a Sebastian Joseph Day is actually playing really well on the D-line for them as well. At linebacker, they got a guy, sophomore Cedric Gray, was a 4th rounder out of North Carolina last year. That's like top 5 in the NFL in tackles. He's been all over the field. He's already surpassed 100 tackles on the season. The issue right now is at corner, where they traded Roger McCreary and Jarvis Brownlee for draft picks, and then they lose L'Jarius Sneed. Their top 3 corners are no longer on the field. They've got a second-year waiver wire claim in Darrell Baker playing all right for them. They've got a good safety at Amani Hooker, a rookie safety, Kevin Winston, who's been really good in recent weeks. They got a 6th-round rookie corner, Marcus Harris, who's playing well at nickel for them ever since the McCreary trade. Like, the defensive coordinator, Denard Wilson, occasionally has them playing above their talent level. The metrics don't always indicate it, but they're also trying to support an offense that can't stay on the field or extend drives at all. And then the dam is just breaking defensively. Like, that's typically what's happening. But certainly the defensive coordinator, a really good football coach in Denard Wilson, does have them playing above their talent level. If they could just get a little support from the offense, things would look pretty good.
Sounds similar, man. Sounds similar. The Browns just a little more aged veterans and premier talent on the defense that is hard to. I mean, you're talking about a team that could end up watching a guy win Defensive Player of the Year and a guy win Rookie Defensive Player of the Year. So it's frustrating. You're living in the same space. I think I'm looking at the schedule. There's 3 games there that I think are tough, right? You got KC, San Fran, and you close the year, I think, with Jacksonville. It's the Browns have the same setup here where they have 2 games to me remaining that feel winnable. Pittsburgh at the end of the year at home feels like, with where Pittsburgh's heading's winnable, and then this one. Let me ask you this. This is a tough question to answer, but I feel like when you're in the middle of it. Are they trying to win, or do you think their goal is to just be as competitive as they can and accumulate assets at this point? Because if you win this one, and then maybe you win that Saints game, all of a sudden you lose a lot of the ability to drop back from 1 to 5 or 6 or 7, and then you'd be going from like 4 or 3. You know what I mean? So I'm just curious, are you at the point where it's like clearly best for the Titans to lose? That's a fine outcome, or is there a feeling inside there that that's not, because I say tanking happens from the front office, the choices they make, the decisions on the roster, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I'm curious where you're at with all of it.
You are absolutely correct. Players are not tanking. Coaches are not tanking. Cam Ward is the ultimate competitor. I know that word gets thrown around a lot. He hates losing. He broke the ping pong table in the locker room because he lost a match of ping pong. You think he's going out on Sundays for his actual profession and trying? Like, Cam Ward is sick and tired of losing. You've got a coaching staff that's trying to keep their jobs. Now, Mike McCoy, the interim, knows he's not going to be here next year. But the defensive coordinator, Denard Wilson, is trying to put out a great resume because he's a good football coach. They've got a bunch of position coaches that have actually done good work this year that would love to be retained by the next head coach. You're right about that. Here's the thing. There's definitely a disconnect between the front office and the coaching staff. The front office traded away a bunch of veteran players in the middle of the season for draft picks because they inherited this coaching staff. They are going to fire all of them. They drafted the quarterback already in Cam Ward, so they would love to get a pick that they could trade for assets that's going to aid their rebuild. But the players aren't tanking. They're trying to have jobs next year. They got a bunch of guys on 1-year contracts that would like to get paid either here or elsewhere next year, and they've got a bunch of coaches that would love to be employed next year. So no, the coaching staff and players aren't tanking. I do agree the front office has kind of set them up to lose. I mean, you don't trade Roger McCreary and Draymond Jones and Jarvis Brownlee in the middle of the season if you're trying to win games right now. You do that because you want draft capital in 2026 and 2027, right? That's the goal of the front office. Now, you're right. I mean, I do think as it's in their best interest to lose. I don't think they're losing on purpose, but they're pretty good at losing, right? They're 1-11 going into this one. So, I mean, getting the first pick when you've already got a quarterback, which looks like to be going to be a pretty good quarterback draft. And a ton of teams, the Browns obviously being one of them, the Raiders, the Jets, the Saints perhaps, how many of these teams are maybe going to be looking to move up to number one? Yeah, it would be in the Titans' best interest to have that pick and trade it away.
I am relatively positive there's probably some dialogue already happening between the two, because the Browns are one of the few that can give you an immediate, meaningful pick in this draft, in addition to theirs. And the Browns spot is interesting. If they win this game, it starts to get really spicy to get into like that 5th pick range that makes a trade not be that sort of Chicago Bears Panthers trade where you're giving up a huge amount to go from 9 to 1. So fascinating on both sides. Listen, it feels like because of the finishes these two are going to have in the division, we'll get together again next year, and I'm sure it'll be hopefully a healthier talk at that point. Maybe we get early in the year instead of late in the year, and these two teams are a little more exciting. Let's hope for that. Justin, we appreciate your time, man, so much. Tell folks where they can follow you. I'm sure most do, but yeah, just give them a clue again where they can follow you.
Well, pleasure was all mine, Jake. Thanks for having me. On Twitter at @JustinM_NFL. Daily Titans coverage, but also daily NFL draft coverage. If you're a Browns fan, you're going to want to be tuned in to my draft coverage this offseason over at thedraftnetwork.com. Weekly mock drafts, over 300 scouting reports, a mock draft machine that if you're a Browns fan, you could go ahead and churn out your own scenarios. Trade up to that top pick, stay put, see what that looks like. So follow me over on Twitter at JustinM_NFL and head over to thedraftnetwork.com for your daily NFL draft needs.
Well, Justin's fantastic. When we greatly appreciate your time, man.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.